Good morning, everybody, and thank you so much for joining us for today's webinar, Why Your Team Can't Sell AI Yet and What to Do About It. Um, I am Stevie Keen. I'm your host for our webinars, and I'm very excited for you to join us today. A quick housekeeping notes. We will be sending the slide and recording out in the next few days, so look for that email. And of course, we want to hear from you throughout this webinar, so please share your thoughts and comments in the chat and put your questions over in the Q&A. We'll be taking questions throughout, and then we'll leave a little time at the end to answer your most burning questions. So let's go ahead and get started. I am delighted today to be joined by Chris Tenay, our EVP of Enterprise Solutions here at Richardson and Challenger, as well as Jeff Hendricks, an Enterprise Account Executive here at Richardson and Challenger. And our producer today is Sarah Doherty, our Marketing Manager. So, Chris, let's go ahead and get started.
Great. Thank you so much, Stevie. We're really looking forward to this session. And I want to kick us off with a poll. I want you to answer the following question. What is your organization's level of maturity when selling AI-enabled products? So this is not selling with AI. It's selling your products and services that your company offers that are enabled by AI. So pick from this list. Number one, we're constantly executing a unique motion specifically for selling AI capabilities. The second, we've created a clearly defined approach to selling AI, but we aren't really being consistent about executing it yet. Third, we've started to add the conversation about AI into conversations about our existing product really defined approach. And fourth, we're not adept at selling AI yet, but that's why we're here. So pick the statement that most closely represents your organization. And let's see what the results have to say. All right, so it sounds like most people are kind of in that third bucket, 38%. We started to add conversation about AI into our existing product set, but it's not a clearly defined approach. Jeff, I'm so curious, you're out in the field talking with sales professionals and sales leaders every day. How does this line up with what you're seeing kind of in terms of where the market is right now?
Yeah, this absolutely lines up with what we're hearing out in our daily conversations. Folks are very interested in AI. A lot of companies are adding on AI into their solution set. Think back to a few years ago, we had sort of the SaaS boom where people started to add on these SaaS products. There are some similarities, but what's interesting, and I think we're going to dig into this today, there are also some differences. And so while folks have AI solutions, how embedded they are into their actual solution set is still TBD.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'm also curious. There were 3 people said they were really great at selling AI right now. So I'm going to be calling on those folks, if you're listening, to get in the chat and tell us what you're doing that's working really well. But this lines up really well with what we're seeing. What we hear from our clients and the sales organizations that we work with is buying AI-enabled products today is an urgent purchase, but it also creates a lot of anxiety. And there are reasons for that. Bain did a piece of research in May, and 80% of executives told them that they plan to increase their investment in AI-enabled products this year. But at the same time, IBM did research that found that more than half, 53% of corporate AI projects haven't delivered the ROI that was originally anticipated from them. And McKinsey found that 44% of respondents noted that their business had suffered at least one negative consequence from implementing an AI-driven solution. And that means that from the customer's perspective, AI feels very necessary, but also like a very risky investment. And buyers need help evaluating their options and coming to some decision. All of this is leading to an increase in what we are seeing, which is a desire for the customer to just maintain the status quo across industries. AI is rapidly evolving technology, but that means that the use cases for how it helps your business continue to be developing, and your buyers are struggling as a result. What does that look like? Well, buyers tell us they have a really hard time separating buzz from reality. The promise from AI from what's it actually going to do for my business, and how can I do that in a low risk way? They tell us that they aren't sure how to define the success criteria around an AI-driven purchase, or that they're anxious, but can they really identify the true risks that they face when buying and implementing AI-driven solutions? Interestingly, we've been talking with clients for a long time about the KPIs they use to measure their business, but AI has changed that, and customers tell us they don't know what KPIs necessarily to use in order to measure success of an AI-enabled product. And they don't understand, interestingly, in many cases, how to buy AI-driven solutions and how this affects the procurement process inside their own company. Jeff and I were just talking before this webinar. We've both seen examples of clients that now have separate AI review boards that sit alongside the procurement process just to approve AI-driven solutions. And this isn't something that we've just been seeing anecdotally. The research bears this out as well. And Jeff, I think you've done a little bit of looking into what the research suggests about the status quo as well.
Yeah, Chris. I mean, what's really interesting is, just back in July, McKinsey actually surveyed business leaders on the latest AI research that they did. And, what they found is that a lot of really large companies, large enterprises, are adopting AI, at least in one business function. And what's maybe a little bit challenging at the moment is that the adoption is not the same as, say, a successful implementation. And that's where a lot of these large organizations seem to be stumbling, if you will. I think as we look to move forward here, you can see there a lot of folks are, adopting it in a business function, and yet only about a quarter have effectively embedded Gen AI solutions into their business processes, and only a quarter have actually have a clearly defined roadmap for adoption. And enterprises, they haven't established a compelling change story around adoption. And you can see that as we keep going is that it's just about 18% have well-defined KPIs. Now, what's really interesting is if you think back again to that SaaS boom, which is probably the last time we had a major shift in solution sets and things like that, a number of these items actually were not like things that stopped purchases of SaaS, but that was a different environment. You had lower cost of capital. You had a number of other different aspects that were taking place. You had a lot of folks that were investing. And so what McKinsey found is when it comes to Gen AI, having executive, almost CEO level involvement and embedding in processes is absolutely fundamental to adoption. And so what's interesting is we have this different environment. And what we're finding is we, get this together is that, it's not just that the technology is too new, and it's not just that the sellers aren't used to selling this. The problem is that, these buyers that we have today have fallen into what we might call the confidence chasm. It's a different environment, it's a different situation, and there's a different level of confidence needed to make some of these changes. So Chris, talk to me a little bit about what do we mean by this confidence chasm?
Yeah, I mean, you think back to what we're talking about with the status quo, Jeff, and I think buyers are under pressure to make an investment, but I think in a lot of cases, they don't know exactly what they need. They are increasingly going to be looking to your sales organizations to help them make sense of the options available to them and to build confidence that the solutions are capable of delivering the kind of return that they're looking for. And I think in parallel to that, buyers are finding themselves in a confidence chasm because they need to align their own internal stakeholders inside their own organizations about the potential that these kinds of investments can have for their business. And that's exacerbating their anxiety. It is causing delays in purchasing decisions. And it's that crisis in confidence that is transforming all of this interest in AI-enabled products into increasing numbers of stalled deals. So as you think about the confidence chasm, I want to hear how this is reflecting amongst your own buyers. If you would, take a minute, go to the chat, and share with us how you're seeing the confidence chasm affect your customers and your buyers? You don't have to share your organization name or your industry, but I'm curious to know to what extent you're seeing this turn up with your own buyers. And, in particular, as you're going to the chat function, if you go down to the bottom of your Zoom window, there's a little thought bubble icon, and that should bring up your chat window. As you're going there, I'm particularly curious from the three people who said that their organizations had a robust and mature selling motion around AI. I'm curious to know if this confidence chasm among buyers is part of what you lean in and help address. All
Yeah,
right.
it's funny, Chris. The one that really pops into my mind is the fact that, InfoSec and, security requirements are getting absolutely more and more robust.
Yeah.
And what's interesting is folks saying, pilots and different things getting stuck in IT reviews. And I would take it a step further and say that customers recognize that they don't even know their own buying process or their own buying timelines.
Mm,
And so, I've even heard conversations where it's like, I want to go forward with the solution. I have a timeline that I need to go, and get done ASAP. How about we just leave the AI solution out for now and we can add
mm,
it in as we go? And
interesting.
so I
Yeah.
think you're hearing situations where the line buyer is saying, you know what, I am actually concerned about my own organization's threshold for getting this into production. So
Yeah.
let's just push it to the side.
Yeah, and it's interesting in the chat. Cami said, we aren't using AI. They hear customers say we're not using AI yet, and it's a lot of it is that, right? It's they might not even be aware that in their organization AI is being deployed, but from a risk perspective, it makes more sense to put that into a phase two and say, let's just get started with what we know, and then we can handle this AI piece, separately. It's also interesting in the chat, a lot of feedback around pilots getting stuck, things getting stalled. Lawrence, I was particularly interested in your comment about having I assume you're one of the folks who has a robust selling motion around AI, saying we offer customers a framework that helps them think about how to adopt and onboard onto AI. And I think that's a really good example, of what Jeff is going to talk about in a minute, which is commercial teaching. How do we teach our customers how to be successful with AI? Because we know more about it than they do, and we have an opportunity to bring them along and to teach them something about it. This is
And
great.
yeah,
Yeah,
these are
Jeff.
fantastic comments. I'm just going to call out one more. I think Cami, calls out a really important piece where she says that like, hey, look, they don't have the governance in place, so they themselves don't know what they can, purchase and add in and what they can't. I think that there's kind of two things there. One is going back to that McKinsey study. They recognized that executive involvement and leadership was incredibly important. So that very much aligns to Cami's comment. And then I think the second piece is a lot of folks realized after the last SaaS boom that they have a lot of tech debt. So they made a lot of individual tech purchases and then spent quite a bit of time trying to work on the integrations. And I think folks are being a little bit more cautious now as to
Yeah,
how they go about that. And so, you really need a certain level of organizational change that maybe wasn't the case before.
yeah, yeah. I think that's so true. That change management piece, leaning into driving consensus, driving alignment, in a business has now become squarely a seller's responsibility when it comes to bringing AI enabled deals over the line. Great. Well, thank you guys all for sharing. I mean, I think what this highlights for all of us is this conundrum, if you will. And if you plot that conundrum across two axes, you see that uncertainty is creating buyers who really want to take action, but their anxiety is causing them to delay decisions. We saw a lot of you comment on that in the chat. Or they're so uncertain about a decision that they're just frozen and they're taking no action. Then we have a third problem, which is buyers who are confident in the status quo, but they're staying in their comfort zone. And then finally, we have decisive innovators, folks who are confident about taking action and know how they're going to do it. Where are most buyers? In our experience, most buyers are over here on the left. So the question is, how do we get them from there to here? And to do that, Jeff has sort of distilled down a couple of guiding principles for how we think about building a sales team to meet this AI moment. So Jeff, as an account executive, really be curious to know, how would you start here?
Well, you know what? I'd start with preparation, Chris. I think the number one thing before any good sales conversation is how can we get ready, but what are we getting ready for? And I think what we need to look at is, look, buyers are coming in with a certain amount of knowledge, and yet, we ought to know a little bit more about our space and what it is and how AI fits into our space. And so, if we think about that, maybe we lean in to why other AI projects are failing to realize that expected outcome. Let's talk to them about what's happening. And at the same time, let's go ahead and look at our company's success stories. What's different about the one or two or three or dozens of success stories that we're having? Was it a key process redesign or an embedment? Was it a specific executive level of involvement? Maybe it was a combination of including products and professional services. Whatever it is, the key is to show up and be ready to bring those learnings to the table, because that's going to help them understand the impact. And it's going to open up a deeper conversation around how their business runs today. And as we go deeper into like what we classically call discovery, you have a better opportunity to discuss those impacts that the changes you're proposing are going to have on their business. So you're no longer just speaking about, say, adding on a widget, if you will. You're teaching about new impacts and outcomes, and that makes it easier for them to, build the consensus that they need. Rarely are purchases made by a single stakeholder these days, and makes it a lot easier for them to buy from you, which makes, it much easier to do that. So how do we put that into action? Well, first we need to understand and we need to help our buyers know what not to do. Let's talk about risks, things that they haven't considered. You may have heard us mention prospect theory before. It won Daniel Kahneman a Nobel Prize in economics. Humans tend to be twice as risk averse as they are gain focused. So said another way, losing $100 feels a lot worse than winning $100, if you will. So we need to be able to speak to our buyers about the risks of staying with the status quo. And to do that effectively, we first need to understand where they're coming from. What have they learned so far about AI? What are their assumptions? What are their potential misconceptions? And what open-ended questions can we ask them that might get them to reconsider those assumptions? And help them understand that actually doing nothing will cost them more than making the correct change, if you will. In other words, we need to help them see what we would call the cost of inaction. So if they do nothing, why does the status quo become untenable or become, less desirable? So you think about added, cost, risk, etc. And when you are able to bring that cost of inaction to light, that tends to add on what we would call constructive tension, if you will. And so let's share a few examples of what that constructive tension might look, feel, and sound like. So constructive tension is awfully misunderstood as a skill. And one thing that's important to define it, it is not aggression. It is absolutely not creating tension between you and your client or you and your customer. It's creating tension between your customer and their status quo. And so it can feel a little bit strange at first, but let's give some examples of what it looks like. So number one, lost revenue. So when we can find critical insights that impact an organization financially, and then those impacts tend to compound over time, that can get a lot of attention from our key stakeholders, especially our above the line buyers. And that might sound like something like companies that delay AI embedded analytics are already behind their competitors. Studies show that less informed decision making has a direct impact on revenue, and it's only going to get worse over time. So a couple keys to this, again, if we're going to create cost of inaction, it's not ROI and it's not potential future loss savings. It's based on today. So there's a direct impact and it's going to get worse over time. It's very helpful. You see how we say studies show there? To find third-party studies that back up your assumptions and your assertions, because those can be very valuable to your customer as they look to build consensus internally. Let's take a look at another one. So let's talk about increased costs. This is where you identify how inefficiency or operational expenses that AI could change are creating a drag on your revenue. So that might sound something like manual processes and outdated systems typically add up to hundreds of hours of hidden labor costs each year. Additional turnover impacts hiring, onboarding, and ramping. What feels stable is actually draining your margin. So what's really interesting there is look at how we're talking about hidden labor costs. We're talking about, the second and third level of things behind that. So we're talking about turnover, which creates impact on hiring, which then, you're talking about recruiting, you're talking about ramp time, you're talking about onboarding. All of those kind of second and third level impacts are incredibly important to bring to light because your customer may assume that those are costs doing business, and yet you're saying that that's their cost of inaction. The next one we want to talk about is risk. This one, probably hits the hardest for your clients, and they need to understand that the requirements the customer may operate in and show how the status quo puts the company or contact at risk. And this is what that one sounds like. Legacy compliance processes create blind spots. Without AI-enabled audit trails, many companies don't realize they're exposed until regulators or customers point it out. What feels like low risk today may actually be your highest areas of exposure. You know, I think that a lot of folks in a lot of different areas have shared with us recently that regulations are constantly changing. And sometimes that can be an absolute catalyst for selling your solution. But customers may not fully either understand, realize, understand the timeline, understand the risks that they're facing. And your ability to show up and educate them can, one, earn you a lot of trust and credit, but it can also catalyze action for them. And lastly, we have market relevance. And here's where you need to show buyers how putting off this AI investment can hurt their market standing or their reputation. And that might sound like, competitors who invested in AI early will already meet higher customer expectations. So it feels like a safe delay can put you in permanent catch-up mode later. So essentially what we're saying is, there's a certain level of experience that you've been delivering, but customer expectations shift over time. Are you keeping up with that? So Chris, as we take this in, I find myself thinking that this selling AI is really more like breaking into a new market and less like adding another product.
Yeah, it does feel that way, doesn't it? A little bit. I mean, I think what is similar, and to your point, Jeff, and it's so helpful to have some of those examples of like what the language sounds like. It is a different selling motion, and so as with when you go into a new market or you start addressing, have a new go-to-market strategy, you need a different selling motion. I think you're right. I think we are starting to see a need for a different selling motion to sell AI-enabled products. What does that involve? I mean, I think there are a couple of components. One, and we've talked about it on this webinar, and I think it's anchored in the research, is how do you build buyer confidence? How do you get them out of the confidence chasm? And there are a couple of things. I think you just did a nice job highlighting them. How do you translate AI capability into real impact and into real impact in plain language, plain English? Tech purchases are hard at the best of times, but understanding them in plain English, what does this mean to my business, is critically important. How do you, and then building on that, how do you share relatable stories, not only of the promise of AI, but success stories about how other clients have got, real tangible success in relatable ways that you can use to help quell buyer fears. And then how do you continue to show value through the process? And we talked about, some of the different ways that you can help people evaluate options, understand where there may be risk that they haven't fully considered, or like Lawrence was sharing in the chat, offer them frameworks for how to adopt the kinds of products and services that you have, so that you're teaching them not only how to buy it but how to implement it. And the second piece of a sales motion like this is how do you help create clarity about the best path forward for the buyer, and that is about creating and clarity not only about the solution but around the process. creating clarity around who the stakeholders are going to be in that process. We often share with clients our perspective on stakeholders they haven't considered bringing into the buying process, who may at some point get tapped to evaluate that purchase, who could be engaged sooner and be helpful in moving opportunities for through more quickly. And then how do you help bring clarity to the risks? You just offered a really nice example of that in your tiles there with the language. But how do you help customers understand both the known risks and the risks that they haven't fully appreciated, and offer mitigation strategies and guardrails around that? And then the final piece is, how do sellers lean into their role, not only of commercial teaching, but of owning the process, of teaching the customer not only what solution is going to be the best fit for them and will help mitigate risk most effectively, but how do you go about procuring an AI-driven solution inside of your own business? And we have a lot to, as sales professionals in this space, we have a great moment to teach our buyers how to buy AI, by sharing the downstream impact of inaction on outcomes, by helping to create key milestones that the customer might not have thought of, and by leaning into the seller's role to actively drive consensus across the buying organization, to the buying committee. So that's our perspective on what it takes to meet this AI moment and create sales strategies to help your teams win in a constantly evolving and shifting market. If you want to learn more about how to develop the skills of your teams to sell AI, we have a new brochure that dives into our consultative selling and challenger sales skills, and how those two can be brought together to support the selling of AI. Stevie, I think you have a little bit to wrap us up.
Yeah, I do. So we do have time now for questions and to jump into some of the chat. So if you have a second, there's a little bubble at the bottom of the screen with a question mark. Go ahead and put your questions in there. We're happy to answer questions as long as you've got them. I think we'll start with this one. We saw a gamut, I would say, Jeff, of the four tiles that we ran through, lost revenue, increased cost, risk, market relevance. Which one are you seeing as much in the marketplace? Like, which one do you think is the one that comes up the most with some of the leaders that you're talking to?
That's a great question, Stevie. What's really interesting about those different tiles is I think that the one you'd likely hear the most is risk. And that really comes down to the fact that folks today are less concerned about missing out and they're more concerned about messing up. This is something we've seen, frankly, since 2022, when interest rates started to rise and folks started to become a little bit more cautious with their purchase decisions. And risk can take on a lot of different lenses. And so you'll see that coming up. And what's interesting is folks may not articulate it as risk. And so our job as sellers is to show up with a curious mindset and think about, what could be some of these concerns? What could be some of those risks? And what questions can I ask around those spaces that will get folks to share, yes, I agree that risk exists and it's worth solving.
Great. And I think that really goes back to that confidence chasm, is because that risk is so visceral in a way that there's so many things where, you know, that you could face increased cost or lost revenue or worry about your market position. But I think the risk with AI is something that's just really acute in a way it isn't with some other purchase decisions.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So I want to take a comment, and we talked about this a little bit, but in those situations, like I think Cami, we all really love that comment she had around governance and authorization. And, this came up a couple times, like, oh, we're interested in AI, but we're not really there yet. I know we've talked a lot about buying behavior and how to bridge this gap. But I think something, Chris, I would love to hear from you is when you hear that specific phrase, like, yeah, we really want this, but we're not there yet. Um, how, what would you say is the right way to approach that when you're that seller in that moment? I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
Well, I think the first thing you want to do is, to Jeff's point, earlier about discoveries, ask some good questions and really understand what they mean by that. Are they not there yet because there is, emotional risk, there's professional risk, they don't have the infrastructure or the knowledge to implement AI driven solutions, or are they not there yet because they don't have the budget, or they haven't made it a strategic priority. So I think unpacking that objection and acknowledging it, hearing them, that's a very real thing to say, authentically, to say like, hey, we are not there. This is beyond where we are. But when you start to unpack that a little bit and understand more about what the organization is doing, where are they? How do you meet them where they are? I think you find a lot of opportunities start to open themselves up. And I think one of the things that we find really interesting is how many organizations may have AI enabled solutions inside the business already that they may not even be aware of. And so, there are several ways that we can help them look at things that they're already doing successfully and gain confidence from that.
Great. I Fantastic advice. Well, that is everything for us today. We're so grateful for all of you for joining us. Please, if you haven't already, follow Challenger and Richardson on LinkedIn. Really grateful for you giving us our time. And it's been our privilege to host you. We'll see you next time. Thanks, everybody.